For the longest time in one Zimbabwean household in the city of Mutare, speaking ill of President Robert Mugabe or his wife Grace was feared and compared to a blasphemous act. "Even my own father is so scared of mentioning Mugabe's name," said a young Zimbabwean woman who preferred to be known only as Joy. She and her husband have been living in South Africa since 2009. "We don't even mention their names in our WhatsApp conversations. We will refer to the Mugabes as our mother, our father, when discussing them," Joy said. This was not something they were taught, but growing up they knew that criticism of the statesman could have consequences, in the form of being detained or assaulted. In extreme cases people disappeared and were never found, she said. Joy referenced Zimbabwean journalist Jestina Mukoko, who was kidnapped and tortured for 21 days. In retaliation, she later said, for an exposé she penned on Mugabe following the 2008 national elections. Joy and her husband came to South Africa when Zimbabwe was at the height of hyperinflation. "It was bad in Zimbabwe. It was like $1 billion dollars for bread," she said. Since then they have built a life for themselves here, with her husband working as a boilermaker and running a business. She is currently studying. At the weekend, the couple and other Zimbabweans in South Africa watched in awe as thousands of their countrymen lined the streets of Harare in protest against Mugabe, openly calling for the end of his rule while the army looked on. Joy said for many years the Zimbabwean army was seen as a tool that fought Mugabe's battles with the citizens. "That is why we were so surprised to see the soldiers doing what they did. Had the army not been at the forefront for the call to change, the march would have never happened," said Joy. For the young couple, life in South Africa has been better than it could ever have been in Zimbabwe, but it has come with its challenges. "I remember when I applied for university in 2009. I was going for tutorials in Daveyton, and one time I went to the tuck shop to buy snacks. I spoke in English and they made comments about me being a foreigner," said Joy. She got scared and never again returned to Daveyton for tutorials. Taxi rides were also horrendous. "I did not know the language, and one time I was in a taxi and there were ladies who made comments when I didn't understand what they were saying. They said, 'This is South Africa, you must learn the language.' I expected that as elders they would treat me better than people of my age," she said. Run-ins with the police have also not always been pleasant, as without a passport proving their legal status, Zimbabweans are threatened with trips to the Lindela repatriation center. 8 years later, Joy maintained that home will always be Zimbabwe. "In Zimbabwe there is peace that you cannot find anywhere else," she said. "But the fact that we are here, we are grateful. We are here as Zimbabweans in our numbers, and we are grateful that South Africans have allowed us to be here," Joy said. Asked whether she believed her fellow countrymen and women would return to Zimbabwe if Mugabe's rule came to an end, Joy was optimistic. "If Mugabe is to resign, things will not change immediately, but people will go back even if there are no jobs in Zimbabwe, as long as they are back in their country," she said.